All right, let's pile it on. Let's get out of here. That's a lot of fish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mecha and Monster Mondays. Today, we're going to be covering a very special episode. Actually, our first kind of TV-related episode, since we'll be covering the 1988 OVA Mobile Suit Patlabor or Patlabor, depending on how you pronounce it. I go with Patlabor because that sounds better in my head. The early days. But with me, I have a very special guest.
Hello. How's it going?
Is you?
Should I introduce myself? Yeah, my name is Zach. Luke and I have done a couple of podcasts together now. One for Jams and Tea over on YouTube, and then one on the podcast that I host, which is called the First Watch Podcast, which you can listen to on Spotify, Apple, Google. Although I think Google Podcasts is like going away. I think that's becoming something else. Who
Oh,
knows? The
dang.
state of flux. Everybody's buying everything. Letterboxd is now being bought for $50 million by some tech company so that they can make it, a pedometer app and track your steps while you watch episodes of The View. I don't know. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great, actually. It's kind of funny. This is at the time of recording this, this is like the second episode that I've recorded like in the past day or so. So it's kind of like I'm finally getting into the niche of podcast recording now. As you probably understand that having been like a podcast person for a while now, which also for everyone who listens to the podcast, go listen to the First Watch podcast. It's really good.
For
It's very,
sure.
very good.
Yeah, we had the you were on when we talked about a bunch of different stuff. It was like Evil Dead Rise and Kelly Reichardt showing up, all that kind of stuff.
Bo was afraid as well. Like that was such a
That's right.
fun lineup of stuff because it was like a little bit of everything
Yeah.
ostensibly.
Yeah,
But
we were just talking
yeah,
about how that release calendar tends to kind of come in these waves. Like right now, we're getting a big explosion of new movies and exciting things like Martin Scorsese and all that stuff because we've had a dry period since Oppenheimer. It's so
yeah,
you have these explosions where you're like, oh shit, we got to cover everything, and there's these moments where it's like,
yeah.
the
Which
last voyage of the Demeter.
yeah, September was a particularly dry month, and even like the thing I was most excited for that I saw eventually came out, and I was like, wow, that was kind of nothing. Cool.
Was that the
It was
creator?
yeah, it was the
Yeah,
creator,
yeah,
which I'm very glad that there wasn't really like from what I remember big enough robots to really qualify or even like prominent enough to really qualify as like a mech film, so we won't have
no,
to cover that. Yay.
no. It's got some like cybernetic enhancement type stuff. He's got a robot arm.
Yeah, but they're not big and they're not like at least side character worthy, so n- the creator does not make the cut. But yes, but today I have you here to talk about the Patlabor OVA, the first actual like non manga kind of version of Patlabor, which actually before we even get into production history, would you be willing to kind of discuss sort of like your history of Patlabor before this specific podcast?
Yeah. I still to this day, I've never read the manga for this series. I encountered it as something that people would put on lists for examples of good mech anime, for good anime films of the 80s and 90s, because the first and second feature films, I think, are like late 80s, and then the second one's 93. They might
Yeah.
be, I forget if it's either way. But, I've seen those posters a bunch of times, and they're both directed by Oshii, the director of Ghost in the Shell, Angel's Egg, a bunch of other stuff. Big anime director, although he's done a lot of live action stuff as well.
Mm.
And I had a friend who was going through the Oshii filmography earlier in the year, and I've been a fan of his for a while, but I've only prior to this year probably only seen like 3 or 4 movies that he's made. Sometimes you get that when you're a teenager. You're like, this is one of my favorite filmmakers. I will never watch anything else but these three that I already know and like a lot. So this year I took the opportunity to kind of go back through his filmography, which included the two Patlabor films that he made. He is also the director of he's one of the directors of the OVA series. I think he's the director of the first 6 episodes of this. So
Yeah.
for me, this kind of has like, it was sort of more of an auteur entry point as opposed to I came up with this series or I watched the television show or I read the manga. It was something where I just kind of jumped into the film adaptation of it all because of who directed it. And I had a little bit of confidence from some people who watched it who were like, it'll get you up to speed within the context of those movies. You don't have to worry about it, which I would agree with. Although it's now interesting kind of going back, getting into the earlier stuff, seeing how different characters have been developed and like maybe which characters were more important in the earlier parts of it versus which ones are kind of in the movies less of a focus, but we can kind of get into that because I think there's always an evolution going on with this series, and the OVA
Mhm.
seems to me to focus. I think it's literally called "The Early Days"
Yeah.
is like the subtitle of it, and so it's really kind of like it's yeah, I guess it's sort of origins. It's like origins of the second unit,
Yeah.
which is the main cluster of characters.
Yeah, and like it's kind of funny because I sort of to an extent kind of had like a similar introduction to the series, which was through like the feature films because I had seen Angel's Leg and freaking Ghost in the Shell. But the thing is interesting though is that my initial viewings of like the films were probably not in like the best ways, which was this is like the worst way to watch any Mamoru Oshii film, which is really late at night and kind of already sort of sleepy.
It's also the best way. That's sort of
It's also
like
it is like a weird intro. I'd say like already sleepy is the best way to rewatch it is probably like
sure,
the way I put it because like
yeah,
when I tried to recollect like what even happened in the original films, I was like,
yeah.
there
I
were
was thinking about
mechs.
this. I was thinking about this, and it's something that I think actually runs through his filmography because if I tried to give you a plot synopsis of Angel's Egg, it's like, well, there's a girl with an egg, and there's a guy with a sword that's a gun, and they're in some kind of apocalyptic place. And I have
Yeah.
interpretations of like what's going on and what all that means. And Ghost in the Shell, which I've seen a bunch of times, I think like I've seen it in each of the last 3 years, including once theatrically. I know the plot of Ghost in the Shell. I've read that manga. I know pretty much everything that goes on. But if I had to give you a concise synopsis of what happened in that movie, it would take me 15 minutes because it's just a little tough to describe the way that he likes to tell stories because they're so
Mhm.
multifaceted, because
Yeah.
they tend to be less driven by a specific plot, like a mystery plot, and they'll be more along the lines of learning the dynamics between two agencies within the government.
Yeah.
and and like that will have 6 characters attached to it, each of whom has their own agenda. And you're just kind of, and when you have a television show like this OVA is, where you have 3 hours of episodes with numerous characters, or with those films, it's just not something that's really conducive to like, okay, and then this is what happens in this span of time.
Yeah.
Within half of one of these episodes, which is like, 12 minutes or whatever, you will an insane number of plot developments.
Yeah, I was gonna say like there are very much like segments like, and I think it's kind of just like a thing with all Mamoru Oshii's film like work in some way is that there are big swaths either of very thick atmospheric kind of just visual storytelling and then a massive info dump that is
Yeah,
super dense, super like
yeah.
multifaceted, and I'm just like,
Every once
cool.
in a while, it'll be the two of them at the same time.
Yeah, I was
Like
gonna
in Ghost
say,
in the Shell, there's a bit where Bato and Major are like out on the waterfront and they're just riffing on
yeah,
like philosophy and like
yeah,
the self and identity. And it's all kind of like cityscapes. It's like very like visual poetry while
yeah.
giving you like really dense textual explanation.
Yeah, or like in Patlabor 2, there's just like a whole sequence where like two characters are talking about like the history of like Japanese military relations in such a deep
Yeah,
like thematic way, and the visuals are like, here's a bunch of decrepit buildings that are
yeah,
really beautifully animated, and I'm just like,
yeah.
yeah.
There's a real insistence on understanding how things work, no matter how complicated they are, because
Mhm.
they do work. And sometimes I think the point that he is making is about that complexity. One of the things that immediately shows up, like if we just hone in on episode 1 of the OVA, where we get to this SV2 unit, we immediately learn that within the SV2 unit, which is the mobile police that police all these mechs that are known as labors whenever
Mhm.
they commit crimes with them, it's a new division of the police. So it's like a subdivision of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. It's like its own specific department of that department within this department. And then we
Mhm.
get to the SV2 and we learn there's a maintenance group, there's the first unit, which is headed off by this woman, and then there's the second unit, which is headed off by Goto, which is our characters. So within this unit, within a unit, within a unit, it's split into 3 factions. Within those 3 factions, you've got 2 different of the Patlabor robots, which have a driver and an operator. And so
Yeah.
it's like constantly you're getting into these hierarchies and subdivisions, learning that like the municipal government of Tokyo is not an entity. It's a big living unit made up of countless entities and subdivisions within those entities. It's a big bureaucratic clusterfuck, really.
Yeah.
And I think that he never loses sight that that is the reality that he is spelling out to you in these stories. Like whether it's Ghost in the Shell, Patlabor, he's got this other. It's his manga series, and then he's also done movies based on it called Kerberos Panzer Cop. Probably the
Oh
most famous
yeah.
one he didn't direct is Jinro the Wolf Brigade, but he wrote the
Yeah.
script with Satoshi Kon. And that's all about the same thing. It's like police
Oh.
within like kind of alternate version of Tokyo. And it's all about how like politics are made up of these sort of interdepartmental conflicts, cooperations, that kind of thing. Like there's this detective character in the Patlabor series who comes in. He's like an ally of Goto, but he's just like
Oh
a
yeah, yeah.
provincial detective guy. And he's like, yeah, my jurisdiction is like this big. I can help you with human problems. And as soon as there's like a mech, I'm out because I can't do
Yeah.
anything about that. That's not my department anymore. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, he's just like the on foot ostensibly like worker. Like I can't do anything that goes, you know, 15 feet above me by that point. It's like I'm done. But
Right.
and
I
and
think in
yeah.
contrast to American media, if we were to use like comic books as an example, even in the most well-developed type of stuff like Daredevil, the New York police tend to be just like one entity. They think with
Mm,
one brain cell. And here it's like it is never that simple. No matter
no.
what it is, no matter how much you drill down, there are 2 people in a room and they're arguing with each other because they don't agree.
Yeah. It is so like multifaceted, just like something that like you would think in most forms of media would kind of have like, oh yeah, there's just like a one solution because they come up with strategy immediately. But like, yeah, that's kind of the 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 Patlabor series is kind of about how so many elements of trying to keep this thing intact or to try to do any semblance of public safety is going to come with like millions of different like considerations to like get it through because like I mean, I guess we'll probably talk more about once we get into like individual episodes, but like the aspects of like, who is allowed to even like pilot the Patlabors and also just like stuff with like in regards to like just genuine how they even like were able to like obtain Patlabors is just like this almost kind of like comedically like drawn out process. And
Yeah,
I think there is like a slight comedic element that is sort of also at least important in the OVA because I
agreed.
think once we get to the films, it's a case of like it becomes more of what most people associate with like Oshii's other films, but like this
Yes.
OVA is almost like what I described as like a kind of like workplace comedy, but if it was about
Hmm.
mech police.
There are way more of the tropes that I associate with anime comedy. For instance, there's like a lot of perverted humor. There's like an episode where they all go to the baths and they're
Hmm.
naked in the baths, and like it becomes a thing about, oh, the girl's over there and she's not dressed and I'm over here and I'm making a face about that. And
Yeah.
it's like this would never fucking happen in one of the movies, but it does give it that workplace flair. Like it makes you feel a lot of this is within the context of the episodes. There will be these events that they have to respond to, or there will be situations where they're on call for really long periods of time and they're sleeping in this like 4.5 to Tommy Matt little like closet, and it's like five
Yeah.
men all sleeping together with their feet on each other's faces. There's just a certain like uh banal boredom that they're always
Yeah.
confronting in this place.
Yeah, which is so interesting to me because like again, I think there is something almost like very purposeful in that because like a lot of people associate like mech series as like a immediately exciting, very like intense kind of like sort of like storytelling. But you know, when it's and I guess it's kind of also like meaningful in terms of like the story where it's like, oh, it is, you know, a mech story, but it is also about like very real like human institutions and like dealing with like really just tedious types of bureaucratic work to kind of go along with it, that it would be like lots of build up to like a big like event in an episode, but then like it just kind of like ends sort of anticlimactic in a very like comedic way. Like the first episode, I don't even think you actually see the person, just like the criminal in the episode, even really get defeated. It just like cuts away like after something really embarrassing happens.
Right. It becomes more about the consequences for the pilots of the
Hmm.
labors at that point, who are going on their first mission and who both immediately damage their brand new equipment. That whole first episode, I mean, the first 80% of it, they don't even have the mechs because they're caught in a traffic jam because they
Yeah.
took this highway instead of that road because they didn't want them to get stolen. And there's always that kind of interconnectedness. You know, it's everything is happening within a single ecosystem. So if the base is out here on the outskirts of Tokyo, it takes this long to get here, and we're all just sitting around waiting for them to show up.
Yeah, it is a like it feels like so purposeful because like you know there's eventually like a kind of moment where like one of the characters Noah is like, you know, having like the moment where it's like, oh, the mech, like I'm like kind of in awe of it, but the thing is like before that even happens, yeah, we just spend so much of the episode like we were supposed to get it now, yeah, but we're not, so just we'll get it when we get it, guys.
Right.
And also the fact that like we don't really have like a character that is like a prototypical like really focused in like protagonist who is like super serious about the work. Like the
Right.
closest you could get is probably like Noah, but like it's
For
more,
sure.
she's just like I have a personal connection with the mix. Like the most
She's a pilot who loves to fly. She's not a soldier, right? She
yeah,
doesn't want to go on sorties. She just wants to be in the air.
exactly. And then like the most like protagonist-esque character that's like not really necessarily like the two superior officers essentially who are
Right.
Shinobu and God, what was his other name?
Gota.
Goto. Yeah, yeah. Like they're kind of not really protagonists, but they are like characters that share enough screen time to sort of warrant being like major characters. But like
Mhm.
literally all the other characters are like a rogues gallery of like just incompetent characters.
For sure. And this is like the first. It's not the first because there's already a unit already at the SV2 that pilots like the older models. So this is sort of, uh, yeah, not entirely first generation. This is sort of the beginning of this program. These are sort of like the recruits that are the top percent or whatever, and
Yeah.
they're, you know, I wouldn't say that any of them except for the trigger happy fella whose name I'm blanking on.
Yeah.
He's the only one that really comes off as deeply incompetent. But I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting, for instance, that Shinohara is probably who you would probably think to be the protagonist of this, who is by far the least interested in doing it
Yeah.
and is not a robot pilot, is like the forward operator for a robot pilot. And so it really eschews these sort of typical expressions of like who the protagonist is. Like the people doing the most heroic stuff aren't necessarily the people. When I say heroic, I don't mean like the whole point is that heroism isn't just getting in a robot and fighting people. It's shrewdness and doing things the right way. And that the people that do pilot the robots are often like, uh, yeah, it just sort of subverts any and all conventions of what you might expect just looking at the roster lined up on day one, what they're all going to do and what this is all going to be like.
Yeah.
There's a certain like the decisiveness of the forward operators is really more of like who controls the outcomes of these missions. And I think in both this OVA and in the movies, a lot of it boils down to Gota being like this chess master guy who always has like a plan and doesn't tell anybody what the fuck his plan is. But he's just kind of like operating from behind the scenes. You know, he's not the robot, he's not driving the car, he's just a guy with a walkie-talkie. But by being that guy, he makes the most stuff happen.
Yeah, I also love like it's kind of almost like a running joke in the series, which is Goto will like come up with like a plan that like in some way like kind of fucks over Shinobu a little bit in the situation.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, sorry about that. And she's just kind of like, whatever, I'm used to this at this point.
There's one point when he's like, why didn't you run away like I told you? And she's like, when did you tell me that? He's like, he didn't because he just said it to himself at one point.
Yeah.
He never once gave her this instruction.
Yeah, he's just like, oh, yeah, sorry about that. Anyways. But just still goes along with like just everything he was already doing at that point anyways.
But I think the key to all that is that just like we were talking about how the government is compartmentalized and has all these different factions, one of the reasons for that is because within any group, different people have different skill sets, and that makes them good for different kinds of jobs. Like Gota would not be a good labor pilot. It's just it would be completely fucking beyond him to be any good at that. But he can be good at this job. And that's sort of what the team is. And it has something to do with how the team is structured at some times. But a lot of times it's just more about how they figure it out and how they work out what that dynamic is going to be. And so it's a contrast of how you split teams apart structurally to try to achieve that balance and how it actually happens on the human side of things. And that's kind of there's a real give and take with splitting teams up and trying to recognize who's got different talents for what and all that sort of thing, because it leads to butting heads, it leads to conflicting perspectives, it leads to, you know, the clearest way to put that is like Izumi is somebody who's really passionate about the labors from a pilot's perspective, from somebody who just really loves these devices, whereas you have I literally just said the name and I've already blanked on it. Shinohara is the son of like the guy that's designed this and has a little bit more of like a mechanical interest in them and like almost a complete disinterest in their function and their use and like getting behind the wheel of one. And so it's like right there you have two people who together have a really supreme mechanical knowledge of these things that is in no way overlapping. You need both of them to come together to be able to put all that knowledge into action or do anything with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think that that specific conversation actually kind of goes pretty nicely with a bit of the production history of actually Patlabor as a series, because most anime or anime in general have usually kind of been like based on a manga already that was like made by someone else. But the thing is that this was ostensibly kind of like a big group collaboration in a strange way, because it was ostensibly a manga and an anime like at the same time of like being released. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the creation of Patlabor was through a group called Headgear that included Masami Yuki, who did the manga, Oshii, who is doing the anime, Yutaka Izubushi, who was the mecha designer, Akemi Takada, who is the character designer, and Kazunori Ito, who is the main writer for the series, and they all kind of work together to ostensibly just make stuff for the Patlabor series. And it's kind of interesting because when they brought Oshii onto it, he was more or less just a freelance director. Like it wasn't even necessarily something that like he sought out specifically, but was just brought on to because like at some point they were like, we want to make an anime for this, and they're like, oh yeah, but we also need like someone who can actually do anime because all we can do is like design. So they were like, we'll do Oshii because at the time he was doing a fair amount of TV stuff because there
Right.
was one anime that I literally can't remember the name of, but I just know it's about like the magical girl with like the green hair and the leopard print.
Urusei Yatsura, I think is the name
Yeah,
of that.
yeah, he
Love
was working
the
on that
Space
series,
Girl.
the Space
Yeah,
Girl.
yeah.
Uh,
Did
but
a couple movies there. I think it's like Beautiful Dreamer and one other. I
yeah, which I might check out at some point because I'm kind of
forget.
might be doing an Oshii rabbit hole myself at this
Yeah,
point.
it's a fun one. It's really engaging, I think.
Yeah. And the thing that's kind of interesting about the OVA though is that its budget was significantly lower than like most OVAs at the time. And regardless of that, when it finally was essentially finished, uh the people like funding it enjoyed it so much they ordered another episode after they had already finished. So they
Right.
had to do it without Oshii.
Is that I was wondering what the deal was there. The seventh episode of this has like its
Yeah.
completely own vibe. Like the series has been brought to a conclusion, and then there's just kind of like this throttle action episode where like
Yeah.
everything stays in motion the entire time. It feels completely different than all the others.
And
It's really funny how
it
you
is
can
it
pull it
is
out.
it yeah, and not only that, it is like slightly shorter, different
Yeah,
director, just all those elements. And if you're wondering why is it like that, is because they did not intend to make that in the first place.
got it. Interesting.
But
Interesting.
yeah, but in terms of those first two episodes though, it is kind of like a really nice like startup for those characters
Hmm.
from where they are, because like a lot of what you're talking about in terms of like all the characters seem to have like their own like speciality in terms of like what they're good at. And it is kind of an interesting like way to like set up these characters sort of as like, they're not really like great individually in terms of like what they could be doing for like the entire force, but like once they actually are able to come together, they sort of are pretty strong. I will say though, it is sort of odd after like rewatching the movies again. Some of the character work is sort of like a bit more obvious and a bit more like strange in the OVA, because literally like there's one character who is just like, yeah, gun crazy cop essentially. And
Yeah,
I was just like, is that literally just his character? And then I watched the films and it's like, I mean, not as much here, but kind of still, yeah.
it's a little bit less pronounced in the movies because I was thinking this earlier. As somebody that watched the movies first, a big part of what I recall about them is less the plot and more about how it developed these characters for me for the first time, because it was the first time that I was being introduced to the team and who these people were and what their dynamics were. And I found that to be very elegant in the movies, but they have a much shorter period of time to do it, a much more devoted idea of what a movie plot is going to be because they are movies. And so, yeah, he feels a little bit simplistic, but he represents an idea that I think is pretty important when you're talking about the police, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a, regardless of how textural or like how dimensional his character is, it is interesting that they're focusing on like the idea of armed police and recklessness and stuff like that. I think in the OVA it sort of, it plays it a little bit too broadly at times. Like it plays it a little bit
Yeah.
too much for like the comedy of like he's got the fucking nosebleed at the sight of like a really really big gun and
Yeah.
shit like that.
Yeah, like yeah, just like foaming at the mouth is like, I want to try out the new big gun, which is
Right.
literally just like a massive shotgun,
I
just
think it's
scaled.
helpful that you know that he doesn't have like bloodlust. He's not a sadist who wants to rip flesh apart. He
Yeah.
just really likes to shoot guns.
Yeah, he
If they
he
were not murder weapons, he would be a gentleman.
Yeah. Basically, it was like it's just like that one detail that like completely changes it a bit. But
Um, no, I was gonna say in terms of the way that the team kind of has these individual strengths, relating it to the idea of these mechs, the labors that are at the center of the story. I think there's a big contrast because there's this idea of, okay, if you're a labor pilot, you have to have these types of skills. If you're a banker, you have to have these types of skills, right? Whatever your role in society, whatever your role in your team or your group, there are these facets. But you're a human, you change, you have different skills, and there's just this kind of weird balance and equilibrium that people have to achieve within their lives. For a machine, you make a machine for a purpose. These labors are specialized mechs. They're designed to do deep sea drilling. They're designed to
yeah.
do whatever, right? Any type of function you can think of. And that's the only thing that they are designed to do. And I think that the movies, for me, get at this a lot better than anything in the OVA, although there are signs of it within the OVA,
Yeah.
where it's this idea of like, okay, so now the project is over. What does the drill bot do? It sits in a warehouse, right? Until you can think of something else to do with it. And it's this idea of like human technology and how we have these projects, but then what happens when the projects are over? Sometimes you have a bridge that people use for generations. Sometimes you have something that is ecologically disastrous. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the crime that comes about in this series as a whole, all of the series and all of the movies comes from people displaced by this, people who are economically displaced by it, the machines that have been displaced by it. Within Patlabor 2, the second movie, the labors that are like brand new in this OVA have been outmoded. There are new versions. The Alphonse,
Yeah.
as he is named, is sitting in a fucking warehouse somewhere and
Yeah.
no longer being used. So everything has this kind of churn and progression to it. Suddenly the kids that were trainees become officers, become teachers, and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's like it's watching the OVA along with like the movies later on really shows kind of like that progression in terms of the characters, but yeah, like it also and kind of it pronounces even more just how like these the labors are sort of after like their use is over, it is pretty much kind of like there is almost like this existential like if once the project is over, what is like the purpose of it anymore after that? And it's interesting to me that like in here it is almost kind of like the crimes that come from this with like the labors that are used by like I think it was like the terrorist groups or something like that. It kind of seems
Right.
almost like they using it in ways that they were not initially even meant for in some ways,
In
depending on
that
like how it was.
in that first episode of the OVA, they're chasing this sort of tripod red bot, which they lure near a museum. I think it's like in a big thing of cherry trees, the
Yeah.
pink blossoms and everything. And it looks, I mean, it reminds me of, I don't know, Pokemon or something, where it
Mhm.
feels like a creature that has been chased out of its biome into somewhere where it doesn't belong, doing something that it doesn't belong because this thing was meant to be over here doing this, but it can't do that anymore for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And
And
the
yeah.
mech doesn't have a mind of its own, but it has that characteristic where it almost starts to look like a wild creature running around in the wrong type of place.
Yeah, and it's kind of and it's interesting because like in that sense, like there's like a personality to like the design of the labors where even it's like obviously has like human attributes, but like I think
Right.
of like almost kind of like the slight kind of bunny ear-esque design of like the labors where it's like
Yeah.
it's an odd like design choice, but like it gives it that kind of not completely human, not completely animalistic, but just somewhere in between is like what the design of it is. And a lot of the uh other kind of like labor designs you see throughout the series have that kind of quality to them. But I guess also another thing that is sort of interesting to me is like in the second episode there's like I think it was called the beach house group, which is kind of like an environmental terrorist
Yeah.
group. But like the thing is there's a lot of plot points like before this explaining like why they even exist in the first place. And it's interesting how like to be honest, like a lot of like futuristic kind of sci-fi settings could basically just be like, it's the future, that's it. And this world has a lot of kind of like slight details into like the politics and the kind of like culture that's like happening at the moment, and even like the environmental like kind of setting are kind of laid out because like that's important to some of the themes going on. Because part of me was like, yeah, wait, why does this terrorist group exist in the first place? And then, like once you learn, you're just like, huh,
One of the
interesting.
central development projects that is mostly peripheral in the OVA and is the central point of that first movie. It's called Project Babylon, which is it's two things. First, they want to build like a big garage to hold all the labors in that they're using for this immense project. And the second one is like a land development project using elements that are in the sea and the ocean to kind of like change the sea levels, raise the land up, develop new land that they can use, which is a real thing. They really do that in Japan. We've really done it in America, but we're kind of doing this sci-fi version of it where we've developed mechs to do it at this accelerated rate. And the reason why we're doing it, well, because of global warming and the land that we've lost to the rising sea levels. We're doing it due to it's basically it's a reflection of how humans exist. We have an impact on our environment, and then in order to circumvent that impact or alleviate it or work against it, we have to come up with new things, and those have new impacts and new impacts and new impacts. And it's circular, it's cyclical in a way. And so, of course, there are these elements who are like, stop. Like,
Yeah,
just stop doing what the fuck you're doing. But I
yeah,
think that the series is really kind of getting into the gray area of where the truth lies in that question. And I don't think that there is a resolution because ultimately this is a series that's about Tokyo. It's a series
hmm.
about Japan, and there can't be any one conclusion because everybody's going to have a different opinion. There's such a fullness of what this city is and where we are within the context of even this speculative sci-fi that
Hmm.
you know we've talked a lot about how the city government or the metro police are not one thing. So of course there can't be like any one resolution or revolution. Like people are always going to disagree. There's always going to be power. There's always going to be people that are kind of trying to push against that power in some way. And I think that it does that without coming across like cynical or overly simplistic, which I think
Yeah.
is quite difficult to do.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like it very much could have been easy to sort of just have it be like, painting either element of it like just completely like as like a simple Saturday morning kind of like cartoon-esque presentation where it's just like we have to stop the terrorists sort of thing. It's more like the fact that it even addresses like why it exists in the first place, I think is leads a lot more into like again the thematic kind of concerns of the series. And also I feel like it is kind of interesting that like there, because like I think like the a lot of the plot is ostensibly like they're trying to protect like I think it was not the president of the US but like someone from like some kind of like US senator or something like that, while like he's in Japan like helping
I think
with
it's the
like the
mayor
project.
of New York City.
Oh right, is the mayor of New York City, and we also get fucking introduced to Kanika Clancy, who
Yeah,
is kind of a side character who, if like I'm being honest, is like the least memorable if it wasn't for the fact that she has her own dedicated intro by being like, I'm Japanese American, and all the
yeah,
people in the police station being like, oh yeah, she could
yeah.
speak English and Japanese.
Right. It gets a little bit. Yeah, that character is just very wish fulfillment, and it kind of speaks to what we've been talking about. I think a little bit the OVA just having like a little bit more of a broad comedic tone
Mhm.
and falling in with some. I'll just use the word tropes again. I think that's what I said earlier, as opposed to really getting into who is this person and what makes her tick. She's just kind of like super badass cop doing
Yeah,
motorcycle jumps and shit like that. There's
yeah,
not really a
like
lot to it.
There's even like there's a section in later episodes where like all the characters kind of we get like a what the characters do when they're not on duty kind of section where you get like
Right.
a sense of the characters and it's really in depth and like I literally cannot even remember like what happened in her section besides her being
Yeah.
like my grandma in like America I think it was I got to go visit her. That's
Yeah.
it.
I think the lead guy gets kicked out of the factory where he goes to visit and he goes to stay with somebody else, and that's the first place he goes or the second place he goes, and it's
Yeah.
like she's watching TV.
Yeah,
Like,
she's like
okay.
and I think it's funny because like the lead guy even is like, hey, you want to like do something that's not watch TV, and I don't even think she responds. She's just like, nah.
Yeah. Doesn't really work. It especially I think contrasted with what we've been talking about on the trying to make the city feel alive and textured and multifaceted. I do think that at sometimes the character work being too one note or too one dimensional can be a little discouraging. On
Hmm.
that same note, there's the one of the officers who's like the big kind of lovable teddy bear guy. He's like a big sweetheart.
Yeah.
And we see him in his home life, and I found that to be quite poignant because it's just sort of understated. There's not
Hmm.
really a lot going on. It's like him and his mom, and they're not very like expressive with each other, but there's a lot of emotion that is passed between the two of them and their interaction. And I just
Yeah.
thought there's little grace moments like that that I thought really kind of brought some of the character stuff home
Yeah.
inconsistently, but effectively when it happened.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that's a moment where like because that character's not even really like well rounded besides as you described him as like kind of the lovable teddy bear kind of persona.
It's
But
all in his posture, I think. It's
yeah,
the way that he sits with his knees drawn up to his chest or doing
yeah,
certain things like that, in spite of the fact that he's clearly like a foot taller than everybody else and like twice as wide. And so he's often in these positions that I think of as like very shy and very boyish, like something that looks like an 8 or 9 year old child. So
yeah.
there is a lot of like quiet characterization with him, but it's really reinforcing the same ideas over and over.
Yeah, but like that little moment like says so much about like the character and his relationships in a way that like, you know, it could not really be sort of like addressed the same way of just like saying like, oh, this is my mother and we have like this kind of relationship
Mm,
with our history or whatever. It's like you get the idea just from like simple moments like that. And there's a couple of instances throughout the show, and I think especially kind of in what I'd say it's like the big two-parter finale is where we
yeah.
get like those really more poignant moments. But the thing that's kind of funny is like sandwiched in between the first two episodes that kind of give you a good sense of those characters and like the two-parter finale is like two, I wouldn't even call them like joke episodes, but they were just like this. We thought this would be kind of a fun concept to do because you have a kaiju episode and a
Yeah.
sort of a ghost story episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the kaiju one was interesting because immediately it felt like Shin Godzilla
Mhm.
specifically because it's like a genetic experiment and the kaiju mutates from form to form to form. It's literally like supposed to be evolution from a single celled organism all the way up to whatever. And that's
Yeah,
exactly what's going on in that movie. And the character himself is like a pretty clear Sarazawa, like
it's
an eye
so
patch.
it's so obvious that like when I was watching the episode and I saw the eye patch and knowing what I knew so far in the episode, I was like, they're not gonna do that, are they? And then they
Yeah,
did, and I was like, oh, you guys.
the specific moment they're going through. I actually like this. This might be my favorite little bit of the episode. Is that they're going through their attack plans and going through why they're not going to work. Basically, I think they go
Mm,
through like 3 or 4 of them, and
yeah.
each time the title card shows up, it's the Godzilla Toho sound effects. Like it's the
Yeah, literally the exact same sound effect, and I was like, okay, yeah, no, this is obviously supposed to be that. And
yeah,
it's kind of funny also because like that episode does the you mentioned this when we were talking about it like before the episode, but like there's literally like the oxygen destroyer like
yeah,
machine, but the
yeah.
thing is that it's like a joke.
It's a gag. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't work.
it just does not work. And also I have to point out like this is just kind of like showing just how deep down kaiju rabbit hole I've gone. But like when I was watching this episode and I finally saw the kaiju design, my
Yeah.
brain did like a like quick spark, and I said to myself, wait, that's just the monster from War of the Gargantuas. And then I was like, wait, why do I know this?
What turns of my life taken? Uh no, I really that was an interesting one to do. I think these episodes, this series is quite grounded, obviously within the politics, the interdepartmental stuff, just everything that we've discussed up to this point. So seeing them kind of get something that was a little bit more sci-fi, supernatural, because I think everything is so grounded. It's like, yes, these are mechs, but they're mechs designed to do specific jobs, and then people use them for ne'er do well shit. But they're
Yeah,
not like, you would not mistake them for Gundams. You would not mistake them
no,
for Avas. You would not mistake them for whatever. So it was fun just to have this little episode where things got a little bit weird.
yeah,
Especially in the end, it just gets like completely fucking strange. Which
yeah.
it's like I don't know that they pulled it off necessarily, but I enjoyed it just for the sake of contrast.
Yeah, it's yeah, like and the kaiju episode ending is just like it's a weird like the monster goes off into the sunset moment, and
Yeah,
then it kind of is followed up by
like going to his soul, which is the dark of the sea.
yeah, and then I think that's like immediately followed up by the oxygen destroyer gag, which is just like such a contrast. But the thing I'm even more like perplexed by is the ghost episode though, because
Yeah,
like there is like a theme that's supposed to be kind of present there about like
yeah,
gun control, I think,
yeah, yeah.
but it ultimately is sort of a bit like undercut in the end because it ostensibly is like Goto's like, sorry guys, it was a prank, so you would all learn a lesson. Oops.
So I think that episode is really it was an interesting one to watch. I've been in a glut of reading mystery novels, particularly I've read three by Dashiell Hammett, the author of The
Mm.
Maltese Falcon. Most recently, I just finished this today, is a book called The Dane Curse, which, as that name, it's like a family curse kind of thing. And it's the same type of deal where there's like supernatural shit, but it's like Scooby Doo. That's like it's always bullshit. It's like somebody's trying to pull something,
Yeah.
and there's that same relationship between like the skeptical detective inside the fantastical plot, right? And it's this for this episode where the key idea is about gun violence and death due to gun violence. It's contrasting, I think, police ineptitude, like the violence of the police shooting civilians, with actual bona fide police detective work by the
Mhm.
two characters who ultimately solve the mystery of like this ghost story. And so I think there's something there, like there's something kind of interesting, but the tone of that episode is bizarre. I do
Yeah.
want to say though, when they're actually after the main couple of characters have learned the story about the ghost and they're talking to the gun happy character who they're all there to teach a lesson to. Everything is like in this amber yellow color. It's like the
Yeah.
golden hour sunset, and it's really beautifully animated.
It
It's a
really
really
is.
attractive episode.
It really is, and it's like it's such an odd thing because yeah, like it is kind of contrasted like heavily with like the overall tone of the episode and just s- some elements where it kind of feels like elements of like Oshii's kind of like Angel's Egg style kind of showing up in like the more
With
like
a ghost.
yeah, the ghost elements,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
also I have to point out because it made me laugh when I thought about this, but like when they were talking about like the idea of like one of the mechs actually being possessed, I said a literal ghost in the shell happening right
yeah,
now.
yes, yeah. They started talking about so it's a ghost episode, and so of course they're saying the word ghost, but when they're talking about it there, you're like, oh, yeah, no, that's that kind of ghost.
Yeah.
Neat. There's like a fucking swamp thing mech that you see
Yeah.
in that. I don't know if it's like a nightmare or like they got one of the things and dressed it up in like seaweed to fuck with them, Scooby-Doo style. Or I don't feel like they answered that question of like what the mech
No.
was doing, but it's like a swamp
Yeah.
thing.
It was like that seems to be up to interpretation, I guess, because yeah, like it's not really very clear.
Um, I do like, and I think it's sort of just a function of an OVA, any TV series, but the OVA particularly just having a limited number of episodes, is that this ghost episode is like a summer vacation. They're all
Mm.
back at their school because all the students, the cadets, have gone home for the vacation. And then that next episode, which is the two-parter, it's New Year's. Like we've skipped all the way into winter and it's like blustery
Yeah.
and gray and snowy. And I just like that kind of seasonal affectation.
Yeah, I was gonna say like the snow, like the seasonal affectation is like especially kind of like adds a lot of atmosphere to the OVA, but especially in the two-parter episode,
Yeah.
which I can say after rewatching the second film, that two-parter episode really in a lot of ways kind of feels like is it was like the prototype for what like Patlabor 2 would be
Mm.
in some ways, because there's some similar plot point elements, the similar like aspects of like the like visual ideas of like having it in like winter and that sort of thing, and also just like stuff like the freaking the it was with a Shinobu basically like kind of like disavowing like her higher ups ostensibly and like kind of going rogue slightly.
Right.
That's also part of that. So it was just kind of weird, like interesting to be like, oh man, this is really similar. I don't know if it was intended that way, but it might have been, even if like the villain is like completely different. Like the villain in 5 and 6 is just kind of some dude that Goto kind of knows.
Yeah, he's kind of like a Moriarty to the
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes kind of thing. They're like, you were my greatest student type of shit.
Yeah, like
uh,
literally like a greatest student type of shit, which like I could say Patlabor 2 kind of improved a bit more
yeah.
on that element because it
I
is
like how
vastly
much
more interesting.
too. So the first one is about that Babylon project, and there are these outside forces that don't want it to succeed, and it doesn't basically. And then in two, it's like, yeah, but then we fucking did it, and now it's over, and we've moved on. And now what Japan is doing is developing these labors, which are being sent out into other countries. Some of them for good reasons, some of them to be the instruments of war. And it's about how prosperity and peace are often founded up on like warmongering and selling arms to people who are at war, and like the quiet nature of like death that's like outside, how just
Yeah.
everything is kind of again just multifaceted. Nothing is ever just one layer. You peel it up and there's something underneath it. I think that the OVA one is just a little bit more of like it's the just pleasures of watching a thriller. What
Yeah.
I get out of that one is how all the characters go home and nearly all of them come back for this plot and the action and like, dealing with it. But there's also this sort of implication that that's where they're happiest, especially
Yeah.
for Izumi, who's up in Hokkaido with her father, who's kind of like, you need to
Yeah.
get married and stop thinking so much about your job. There's just a
Yeah.
joy and a passion that they have for being a part of this team and going there, where it's like the vacation they go home, but that's not home anymore. The home is where they've spent their time and put their feet in each other's faces. And I like that, even though sometimes it can be a little bit like the values of being a workaholic
Yeah, I
maybe
was
can
gonna say,
push against your own sensibilities. I do think that there's something to this idea that it's like, no, I mean, it's because a lot of them are from unhappy backgrounds. It's because they wanted to go out, be independent because their home lives didn't give them everything that they wanted. And so now they have this because they have each other, which I think is very honest, regardless of how you feel about the whole like work life balance dynamic. I think it's really true that you get to know the people that you work with on this level, or that you can if they're cool.
yeah, exactly. And I think like that element is kind of what adds so much more kind of emotional weight to like the actual conflict that kind of does arise by the second episode, because like it's not, and it like at this point it's not anymore just like a, oh, it's some dude who like took pilot of a labor and is now like wrecking havoc. It's like a full-on coup like happening, just
Right.
like while they're like away on vacation. And so it adds a bit more of like the like urgency to that. And I also just like some of the character relations in terms of like coming to terms of like having to do something either dangerous or like just kind of like illegal to like find a way to stop this, because I love a lot of the stuff with Shinobu and Goto where they're like having conversations about like, like, if you're gonna do this, the higher ups are probably gonna like completely disown you ostensibly. And like it's it's interesting because like some of the conversations during like that scene where like Shinobu's having like the her higher ups essentially like this, like, you're banned from the force ostensibly, and like talking about like, like we should fight back and all that sort of thing. But like it is kind of interesting though thinking about it, because like she's like we should fight back, but I'm like they say they have a nuke though.
Right, right. Yeah,
It's
there's a certain, and I think there's even a question, because that's the, I was talking about that earlier, where Goto tells her to run away, but doesn't. But like that's what he's saying. It's like, don't fucking stand here and fight this fight. Get out of there.
yeah,
Leave. This isn't worth it. Whereas I think for her it's passion and pride, and it's every kind of pride, good and bad that you can imagine, where it's she doesn't want to lose face. She doesn't want to be seen as just rolling over to this. It's like, no, 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 no. We should, she literally says it. And I mean, it sounds like the Japanese army more than the police, where it's
yeah,
like, we will stand here and fight to the last man. And it's like,
yeah, till
that's
we all
psychotic.
die.
You should not do that.
Yeah, no, it is by all
That's a
accounts like
bad strategy.
bad idea, but like it
Yeah,
also is, yeah, like that sentiment does feel very like honest in that sense, because it is like it's insane, but it is like it seems like what you should do in the face of ostensibly like, yeah, it's either we lose our entire sense of self or just be completely obliterated. And it's
right.
like there's some honesty in that, but it does also come across as like a kind of like, you know sort of mirroring like Japanese military sentiment. And honestly, I'd say she's probably like the most interesting character just from this like franchise that I can think of, because like she is obviously like kind of the, like stone cold cool woman character, but she's not like Kanaka Clancy, who's just that.
Right.
Like
Right.
she has kind of this unshakableness, but still like
She's
earnestness.
almost always in the position of the greatest risk, because she's like
Yeah.
the de facto leader of this SV2 unit. And then I really kind of like the three leaders. So you've got her, you've got the old maintenance guy, who's like,
Mhm.
he's
Yeah.
also pretty like unflappable and cool, but he's just kind of like, he's like the dude in the garage. And I like his
Yeah.
engineer sidekick, who is the guy with the oxygen destroyer. He's a little bit more silly.
Yeah.
But then like the Gota, who is leading that second unit, he's much more of a gambler. He's much more like, fuck it, I'll just do what I want, because he's not really the one with his head on the chopping block, whereas she is. So
Yeah.
she's much more concerned with, how does the unit look? How are we going to be treated? How is this going to impact us into the future? And she's also completely unafraid to just be like, I think that our team should be given good shit, and that you guys are fucking not trustworthy little slimes.
Yeah.
And there's a real difference between, I think one of the questions that you end up asking is like, what the fuck is the difference between her team and Gota's team, really? And the
Yeah.
answer is the two of them. It's that she's kind of always doing these very sensible type of missions, whereas he's often doing this kind of like Mission Impossible shit.
Yeah, just something that is like by all accounts just like a bad idea, except for the fact that he can somehow get it to work occasionally.
We're gonna do a feint where we're bringing in this labor with the two helicopters, and you see it coming, and the other dude's gonna fucking pop out of the ocean.
Yeah, like yeah, like literally like pulling that shit is like, once again must be like emphasized. This dude has a nuke, or it
Right.
says at least.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's kind of where it all gets a little interesting. I actually think the Mission Impossible thing is pretty on point, and maybe it's just kind of
Mm.
a general byproduct of stories like this, is that you're always going to have that sort of like, okay, here's how it would go by the book, and that's boring. And so we're gonna contrive a situation where by the book doesn't work. And what we need is a dude who
Yeah,
thinks about this shit completely sideways.
a real McBain situation.
That
Fucking-
final episode, it's like they've got the guy who's on the highway because he's stolen
Mm.
the truck with the labor in the back of it. He doesn't even know there's labor in the back of it because he stole it from the guy that stole it.
Yeah.
And they set up the sort of dragnets on the highway to stop him. And when Gota sees it, he's like, "You should take this down. We don't want him to leave the highway." Like he's always kind of doing that. He's like, "The proper procedure, that's wrong. Here's
Yeah.
why. Do this dumb shit." And he's like, "House." So replaces blood with bleach.
He really is in a strange way because like it is one of those cases of like if shit just went wrong for him just like a little bit more, you'd kind of be more on like the I don't think this guy should even really be in this position. But the thing is that he's just right enough that like you're still in his favor, and also just the fact that he's just an endearing character, you're just kind of
Yeah.
like, I hope it works out for you because you're fun.
Yeah.
And also that extra episode, I think we kind of already discussed a little bit, but it is interesting to me because one, we get another mention of Beach House, which is the terrorist group from episode 2, and also this might be like the most actually mech centric episode of
Yeah.
all the episodes,
Probably true.
which is interesting to me because like I think after by this point it was kind of emphasized enough that like it's not necessarily like that the show is about the mechs. The mechs are kind of just an extension of like the thematic ideas going on, whereas this one's like, what if we got like fucking Noah and this random dude to like clothesline a mech, wouldn't that be awesome?
There's
And
this. It,
yeah.
it doesn't necessarily relate to the idea of mechs. It's regarding Patlabor 2. It's from the audio commentary of that movie, I believe. And
Hmm.
Oshii is comparing it to Akira, where I'm reading the quote, but I'm paraphrasing it a little bit.
Hmm.
Where he says, "I've been living in Tokyo for 40 some years. It's easy to think this is an uninteresting city or that you want to destroy it. The most frustrating thing that I feel when I watch movies like Akira is that when they destroy Tokyo so easily, uh, if you depict it as a city, which you won't even miss if it were destroyed, as fake, like it's only made of steel and concrete, destroying it doesn't accomplish anything." And he's talking about how the catharsis of something like that is only possible when you make the city real. So
Hmm.
it's like the idea is that while the mechs are not necessarily like the front and center action focus, they exist in a place where they feel perfectly natural, where they feel like they belong, where they feel like an extension of what the story is. And so
Hmm.
when that mayhem does break out, it feels like it's happening in a real place with real consequences. Even if it's just like a dude in a labor that he doesn't have much control of and he's like destroying a house, you're like, a family lives in that house. You're not just like, it
Yeah.
never feels like random or out of place. And I think that adds a really nice definition to the mech genre, just like he's talking about with Akira, where that
Hmm.
destruction starts to feel palpable, and so you don't want it to be destroyed. You want these certain plots to work out. You're like, if this Tokyo gets nuked, everybody that I've met so far is dead. This
Yeah,
cannot
like
happen.
all these great characters that you've come to like really appreciate, and like all these and even like you think about like the spots that kind of show up in the episodes where they're all like on vacation, like the kind of like the little restaurant that
I I love
Asuma
the
goes
usage of
to.
food in these, where you've got the grocery store by the school where they go and they get stuff, or like there's a
Yeah.
point when they're getting the grocery list. It's like you want instant ramen and melons and oolong tea and
They're all like
beer.
having to like make so many like complicated orders, and like Noah's just like, oh my god, can you make this any easier for me?
Yeah, I love that. I think it's such a, you just really get the sense of this is a real place. These are real lives, and they have that drag, empty space, boredom, but that's what makes them feel like they have this value and definition. And I think it helps with the like actual overall structure of this being 7 episodes that are kind of skipping from summer to winter,
Mhm.
because you feel like that even when you're not watching, there's a lot of time that's spent between these people.
Yeah.
because of how the stuff that you do watch is developed that way.
Yeah. And I think also with that in mind also, well, elements of the OVA for me are kind of like a bit like clunky in terms of like overall structure in some ways. I think like that element is something that I do really appreciate. And I also think when I eventually did rewatch like the feature films, it added so much more appreciation for me because of it. Because like I think like there's like one shot in the films that is almost like the perfect example of like what you're talking about with Oshii's quote about Akira, where it's like you won't really like feel anything from the destruction of Tokyo if you don't get a sense of it as like a real place, where it's like the one labor going like ham in like what looks like kind of like a slum area, and there's like a cat on the roof as you see
Mm,
like a mech just causing havoc in like the distance is like, like little details like that like are kind of started up here, but I think kind of become even more fleshed out once you get to those movies.
for sure. And then by the time you're in Ghost in the Shell, it's
Yeah.
that's its defining characteristic is that you're always watching the city. There's that huge centerpiece scene where you're just being taken by boat almost through the center of it.
Mhm.
Rain starts, a bunch of school kids in, yellow rubber hats run out and they're in the street making puddles. And it's everything is about this living, breathing place. And that's
Yeah.
all kind of like being started here.
Yeah, I was gonna say like a lot of even like a lot of stuff that even though like when I think of Oshii's like style, it's very different from like what the OVA looks, but I think that's just because of the fact that it's a TV production. Like, I mean,
For sure.
his work with other TV stuff is probably not going to look exactly like his, like feature length like directional work, but like those at least those thematic conceits feel like they kind of are started here in a lot of ways, even though like there's Angel's Egg, but like I don't. Angel's Egg is like an interesting one for me because like it's not a case of like I don't even know if I could really like just be able to say in depth like themes about it other than just what the atmosphere of it presented.
My take on Angel's Egg is that it's like the alien to Ghost in the Shell's Blade Runner.
Mm,
It's like future sci-fi kind of Solaris memory machine robot rain noir detective, and then this one's like dank apocalypse rib cage
mm.
rain, but it's like foggy, misty. That's sort of the impression that they both leave on me. It's like a weird Ridley
Yeah.
Scott dichotomy.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's interesting. Actually, that's kind of a neat point because it does kind of have like it evokes like that same sort of like sensibility of
Like
like
Geiger art of like the
yeah.
weird contraption coming up with like all the angels praying inside of it. Just looks like the fucking space jockey stuff. That's definitely like way more of a poem than anything
Yeah.
else. That's probably the best way to try to access it.
Yeah, pretty much so. And it's kind of interesting to see like him still try to tackle some of that, but like in a, fairly small budget OVA style, because like even though it is so different in a lot of ways from like his presentation and other work, it still comes through. But especially in episodes 5 and 6, I think 5 and 6 are kind of like when I was watching this is like, okay, this is when Oshii's like sensibilities are starting to kind of come in full force in a lot of ways. Uh, it's a lot of the plot points and kind of just like the atmosphere, I think, are really interesting. It does kind of suck though that it just ends so abruptly, though.
Yeah,
Like I was like, wait, but like what happens like literally after like right after like where it ends off?
yeah,
Because like I'm assuming Shinobu's still like banned from the police unit, right?
yeah. I feel like there's a lot still left to be explored by the end of the OVA. Like it's an interesting sort of proof of concept for making this manga into an anime that works, making it into something that's watchable. That definitely is more foundational to, I think, like better development, both for Oshii as a director and then for those movies later on. Can't
Yeah.
speak to the series, still haven't seen the series. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
that there are fans of it out there that are like, how the fuck have you not watched the actual series? But it'll
Listen,
happen one day.
listen. I was gonna say that might be something to cover in this series, but also that's like 41 episodes, and quite
Right. It's a
frank,
little bit more commitment.
I was gonna say I could probably like cover 7 movies in the time span that it would take
Right.
to cover that whole series. I don't know. Maybe I'll watch like a couple episodes and maybe it'll be like the best thing ever, and I'll be like, I'm gonna dedicate a whole month to just Patlabor and nothing else. But there's so much shit I still need to cover, so that's probably not gonna happen. But yeah, and honestly, like there isn't any extra stuff I could really talk about with 7 because it's honestly, to me at least, from what I can remember and what I wrote down, is just a case of like that was a fun episode,
For
not
sure.
particularly thematically
It
interesting.
is bizarre to put it at the end
Yeah.
because it does not feel like it culminates on anything or it just feels like, here's the team doing what they do. This
Mhm.
is the unit. And it's very propulsive, it's very exciting. It feels like it probably should have been slotted before the two-parter, between the ghost story and the two-parter, as just like, here's an action banger before we get right into the big send-off.
Yeah, and like yeah, it's and I guess it is just kind of a victim of like weird last minute kind of like producer decision making. But if nothing else, at least like it is fun, and also I just appreciate it aesthetically because it is like nighttime road, like
Right.
light visuals, and I am a big sucker for that. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
think what it is that it just misses that the intrigue here comes more from like scheming and problem solving than the action a lot of times. And
Mhm.
I think it just also doesn't really hold up to the action of the two-parter where you've got, they've got the big fucking gun on the labor
Yeah.
coming through the tunnel and they jump over the bridge and everything. There's like a lot of action in that two-parter that I think is even better than it is in this action episode, which is why it would feel better if it were first. It feels like it was ramping up into
Yeah.
that. Sort of ramps up, slows down, ramps up, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like it feels like an episode that is like another like characters kind of you getting a sense of these characters that would have been better to help pay off in that two-parter when like everyone has to come together for, the major threat.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's just weird. And again, it is probably just a case of like they literally just made it last second because they
Mm-hmm.
were like, this is great. We should make another one. And everyone's like, I think Oshii's literally working on the movie right now. Because like this like the series started in 88 and finished in 89, which is like the exact same year the movie came out. So like
Mm,
I'm assuming Oshii was like knee deep in the film by that point.
right.
So yeah, it is, yeah, odd episode choice, but at the end, but like honestly, overall, like it is a pretty solid OVA, I'd say, for
Mm-hmm.
like it's, to me, it's like a great introduction point for characters, and once you get into the films, you get, like obviously more polished visuals and that sort of deal, but like I think even more nuanced kind of like delving into its like thematic trappings.
Yeah, I think I'm happy personally that I got to it after the movies because I had such a deep appreciation for them and I enjoyed them so much. And
Mhm.
this just kind of shades in the gaps. I think it's something that kind of benefits from me being aware of the characters and just kind of enjoying spending a little bit of extra quieter time with them than usual.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't really know how it would play for somebody that was like coming from the manga or watching it for the first time. I think that if you watch this for the first time, you might kind of come away and be like, wow, this is a little bit more uh, reserved than I was expecting it to be. If you haven't seen the movies, which I do think managed to ramp up more uh, with their larger budgets and all that type of stuff. But
Yeah.
I think that this mostly does hold together. I'm kind of the opinion, with an OVA, a lot of times it's more like, here's 50 minutes. We spent a lot of money on it. It looks really good and it's stupid. There's really not a lot of value to it. This felt in a lot of ways like a contrast to that, where again,
Yeah.
it feels more like a proof of concept of how do we translate this into an anime, which I think was successful.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's kind of how I look at it. But I think I enjoyed it more than I've enjoyed most OVAs that I've watched because it felt more thorough. It felt more kind of like a complete piece. I like that it was an actual little episodic mini series. I think even though
Yeah.
that could be tighter in some places, I think it sort of works for what it's trying to do.
Yeah, I think like it is kind of interesting because like in the way I see it, it does feel more like a proof of concept of not just like the movies, but like obviously of the series in a way because like I've seen some snippets of the series itself and it more or less looks visually kind of the same to
Sure.
it, which also that's another thing to bring up. It's so funny to like to see the visuals of the OVA of like the character designs that are much more like blocky cartoonish and then going to Patlabor 2 that is just like
Gorgeous. Yeah.
detailed to like an insane degree.
Yeah.
Like if you look at like Noah in like the first episode of the OVA and then watch Patlabor 2 and like the opening sequences, you're just like, oh wait, shit, that's her? Oh.
Yeah. 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 I mean that second movie looks every bit as good as Ghost in the Shell does. It's not quite as geared for like the visual poetry type of stuff that Ghost in the Shell likes to do,
Mhm.
but like, good God, that's a pretty movie.
Yeah. I honestly feel like if nothing else, that was also another case of like proof of concept of visual ideas because I think of like I was talking about like the montage with like them talking about like Japan's military like
Yeah,
policy with
yeah,
like the buildings. It's like that feels very Ghost in the Shell montage in
definitely.
the middle in a strange way. But like
There's a
yeah.
point when that detective character is like going around in that movie. He's like in a boat and he's
Yeah.
just and it
Yeah.
feels like a proof of concept for that specific scene for sure.
Yeah. It is
I don't know if
always
that's the
yeah.
same moment or not because you're definitely following the detective at that point in the scene I'm
Yeah.
thinking of.
I think
Either way,
so. Yeah.
it might
It
be.
yeah. It is I gotta say it's always funny to kind of like to watch a director's filmography like out of order because then you kind of have like the instances of like, oh yeah, they did that too, like in this
Yeah,
other
for
one.
sure, for sure.
But it feels very different this time around.
Yeah,
But no, I'd say it's for me like in terms of like what I would place as like something you should like where you should start with like pet labor. I kind of sort of agree with like the watching the movies first because I
yeah,
can't again I won't attribute my first watch as like a genuine like first impressions because I was sleepy, so that's not the best way to start any Oshii film. So I could see starting it with the films as being good, but I could also see starting with the OVA as being nice way to start because if nothing else, like the characters feel a bit more central in the OVA rather than like necessarily like major plot beats until it gets to the finale two-parter. And I
right.
think that helps, if nothing else, make the sort of slightly obtuse way that like exposition can be sort of presented in like the films a bit easier to digest was when you
For
get a
sure.
sense of the characters a bit more.
That said, I think starting with the movie helps because now I've got these different thematic ideas and I can see how the OVAs are also contending with them, which I think are a
Hmm.
little bit more in the background. People aren't pontificating on these ideas as much here, but they're
Yeah.
here, they're present. And I think that in a way I was able to access them a little bit better just because I had that familiarity.
Mm. Yeah, that
So I
actually is
think
a
it
fair
works.
point.
I think it works pretty
Yeah.
well both ways.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's like it's I'd say that's very much the sign of a successful like OVA to like an already existing franchise is if like regardless which order you watch it in, it still is able to add something kind of nice
Yeah.
to the
I think
plate.
being the early days, if you watch it after, feels like it fills in the blanks, just like it feels like
Yeah.
you would be starting off in the early days if you started here. So it's like either way.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no, I'd say like overall thoughts on it is that it is this like even despite its like small budget, it is able to kind of go with some very aesthetically pleasing kind of like visual choices despite some limited
Yeah.
animation like here and there, but not like enough to be like, oh, that's kind of rough. Like even like stuff that came around the same time that I've seen that are just like full-length anime stuff didn't look as nice as this did in some areas.
It's got some really good looking like manga layouts when they're talking about that terrorist group or like how
Mm,
the people you're going over these like crowds of protesters and they got their signs, and it's a very simple shot because it's not even really animated so much as it's a camera movement over a single image that's been drawn as like this big almost splash page mural. So there's a lot
yeah,
of like the history of these guys as like manga artists that I think helps to smooth over some of the budgetary and animation limitations. Like
yeah,
the actual just like drawings and compositions are quite strong and well thought out throughout.
yeah. I was gonna say that that definitely helps with like experience in manga kind of can help smooth out some of those edges of like we can't really do much with like movement, but like the impression of it can be enough more than anything.
It's why like I think one of the better images of this entire OVA, there's a bit where Izumi's in her labor. They're chasing after, I think it's in the second episode, they're going to disarm that rocket launcher. And she
Mm.
cannot get over a bridge and she can't get under the bridge. And so she has to like grab a blimp and the blimp takes her over. And
Yeah.
there's just a moment where she gets over and she's kind of like passed out prone on the other side of the bridge where she's just gone over. And it's just this image of the bridge over the road. And it's very simple and it's like a pull out, but it's incredibly funny because you're like, look
Yeah.
at how much shit they had to do just to get past that little obstacle right there. Just little visual humor like that that's peppered
Yeah.
in throughout the show is quite strong.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like it also has like a lot of like instances of really strong like visual humor of that specific moment also kind of like stands out in my mind quite a bit. Uh but yeah, I was just think is there anything else that we forgot to cover? Because like we talked about all the episodes individually in some way.
Yeah. No, I think that's pretty much it for me.
Mm, cool. Because I think that's also it for me. Because most of my other notes are kind of like ambiguous things that we've already touched about anyways. So I
I kind
think
of
that
like how the intro of this, a lot of Oshii stuff, like anything Kerberos Panzer Cop, they all start with this thing. It's like an info dump. They're like, okay,
oh
so
yeah,
here's the
yeah,
deal with what a labor is. Here's what it comes from. Here's why
yeah.
the police exist. Like every single episode just gives you this like 1 minute long lore dump. It's
Yeah.
very Oshii.
And also I think it's that the opening is like a very good indication of like the kind of like tonal contrast of the show because like you have that really like cool music that's like very
Yeah,
thumping and the info dump and then it's followed by like an almost like slice of life cheery anime intro like
yeah,
followed it and it's so
yeah.
funny because like it's like it has like the traffic's like Noah doing like a run through the park and then she just
Right.
sits and then there's fucking Alphonse just like sitting in the middle of the park.
She's got like the wrong color hair. And then intro, it's like brown.
Oh
I don't know.
yeah.
It's like, what's going on with this?
Yeah, I was kind of confused about that. I wasn't sure if they were trying to like emulate like really harsh sunlight, making like the brown hair like completely black or something like that. But
Yeah,
like
it's just
then
wrong, I think.
and then they cut to another shot. It's like, oh no, it's brown here. Okay,
Weird.
might have been like one of those like fucking like wrong colored Bart Simpson shirt situations where they made like the manga and
Yeah.
because it's in black and white they were like wait is her what color is her hair it's like obviously dark right and they're like yeah it's black no I mean brown and then they already done like half of the intro before they could change it. That's what I like to think is the situation at least, but yeah, I don't know, that song also kind of slaps. I wish it was on Spotify. uh But now that we've kind of covered everything that we want to cover for the show, we get to everyone's the reason everyone is really here. The real meat and potatoes of the series, which is as my last host described it as rate that mecha in a Pokemon-esque intro type way. Uh, but the issue I find now is that I remember that there's like more than one mech in this series that's not just the Patlabor. Uh, so I'm going to just stick to the Patlabor unless if you remember any of the other mechs particularly well besides like the one spider robot at the first episode.
Yeah, you got the spider robot. There's the red one that the guy's using in that final
Mhm.
seventh episode.
Yeah.
There's like the big green ones that they're using during the coup
Yeah,
that they
those are the
have
green
to like
ones. Yeah.
fight off and stuff. But no, so the main ones they're called like 98s, I think. It's like the 98 model.
Yeah.
And they're cool. I like the design. You know, it looks really cool on the poster with the ears you're already talking about a bit.
Yeah.
I think that the movies do an even better job of giving you like how they pull these revolvers that are the size of a minivan out of
Yeah.
like the calf of the robot, where they do stuff where it's like no, like Izumi's got to like climb up into her cockpit from the outside of the robot, so you see her like climbing. So I really like these mechs in general, but I don't really feel like the OVA gets as much face time with like how they function and what they do. It's kind of cool to you see them on the trailers and everything like that. But
Yeah.
I think I would give them a higher rating if we were talking about the first film, which they feature really prominently in. But I
Yeah.
think here I would probably settle on something like a 6.
Yeah. I'd say like 6, 7 areas probably where I'd go with
Yeah,
it too, because like they are very like iconic designs, but it's like obviously a case of like as it's called the early days, it's like this design is even kind of in its like infancy before it
right.
gets really, really nice in the feature film. So I'd say probably a 7. And like the and stuff like the green like coup robots are kind of like 6, 5 area for me because like they just look like any old like generic like military mech design to me.
Yeah, I agree. They seem a little bit like background art. They look kind
Mhm.
of cool when you're looking at here's all the people, here's all the the trucks, and here's a guy out with like a megaphone yelling, and then there's like 4 mechs in the lineup, and they
Yeah.
look like at the end of The Last Jedi when they got all the fucking things rocked up. It doesn't really matter
Yeah.
how cool any of them individually look because you're just looking at like 12 at a time,
Yeah,
which is
you're
neat.
yeah. You're not necessarily looking at like the design of the individual, but just like the sprawl of them.
But yeah, a few too many episodes here I think are like just not involved enough with like the mechs and what the mechs are doing.
Mhm.
These are like weirdly dainty. It's kind of funny. They like to give them the property where they'll like do little like an anime prance like
Yeah,
in or
yeah.
out of a situation. It's like that is a giant robot that would tear up the street, but okay.
Yeah. I also kind of and I think this is actually something I really enjoy, but it is also just like how as you're talking about dainty they are, but also just like how like prone to just breaking like the mechs are because like even in like the first episode when they get their mech for the first time and they like break almost all of them in like
Yeah,
some way, shape, or form.
I think one of the heads comes off and the other one loses an arm.
Yeah, and then like the end of the episode is like, do you realize like how much time we're going to have to fix this now? And that's time that you're not going to be able to use the labor, right? And they're
Right.
like, what are you gonna do? But
Yeah.
yeah, and I the and the other individual like mechs I feel are interesting, but like not even really particularly worth like rating. Even if they are kind of fun, because I do like the little spider robot
Yeah.
in the first episode, but it is like it's its function is literally just to be an enemy in the first episode to like set the series up, and
Right.
and I don't even I and the red mech in the final episode is only notable for me not because of its design but because of the clothesline at the end, and that's it.
Yeah. It's kind of the first one that really feels like a proper mech. Yeah, I think this is something that the movies give you a little bit more juice, a little bit more face time. Even when they're just doing their proper construction jobs, I think there's just more emphasis. There's literally just more,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I think that must be a budget limitation. I think that must be part of what's going on there.
most likely that's kind of like how it feels to me because like it's also just like another new thing you have to design rather than just characters you've
Right.
already got like models, sheets of, and all that sort of like good stuff. And it's and plus like when you're trying to do like a mech sequence, you want to at least have it be detailed enough that like it is like, oh, this is like what you've come here for to like look at the visuals. But also at the same time, it's like that's not really what the series is like for because
Mhm.
but then again there might like there might be kind of like the producer like element be like, yeah, we get what this is thematically about, but like people are here for the robots, and everyone's just like, okay, but like it's the war is bad, wow, cool robot like situation.
Yeah.
So like it's
Absolutely.
so like yeah, there's kind of that dissonance here, which is I think is funny because again we spent like the past hour talking about like the intricate like thematic workings of this in terms of like like ideas of like safety and like in Japanese kind of like military concepts and history, and then we ended off with, all right, but like what is the coolest robot? So I in a way, this whole podcast is kind of its own wars bad wow cool robot. But you know, you know what? If unless if listen, as long as you get the message by the end of it, you it's not our problem. Uh,
Uh,
but with that being said, then I think that caps off our episode on Mobile Police Patlabor, the early days. Thank you, Zach, so much for joining me on this
yeah,
episode.
of course. I have a question. Since it's October and when it's Halloween, are you ever gonna cover this mech of John Kramer, Mecha John Kramer
Uh,
from the Saw 3D poster or Jigsaw? I forget. I think that's Saw 3D.
listen. Maybe I'll make like a mini episode for Halloween where I just cover the poster of Saw 3D because God, I
IG
actually
John Kramer.
yeah, I was it's an entire episode where I just do it in the voice of John Kramer. This
Hello, sir.
episode. Hello, Mecha and Monster Monday viewers. What if it's like, oh God, I'm just like imagining like a remix, but it's like the violin theme song from like Godzilla that somehow like morphs into the Saw theme song.
Yeah, I think the next new release, there's like a literal Godzilla movie coming out this year, right? -1.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say that's gonna be most likely a very future episode. In very
yeah,
future, I mean like probably the day that comes out, I'll probably record an episode with someone.
yeah. Nice.
But yes, I'm very. It's honestly, it's like these next few months are very exciting for kaiju media specifically because
Mm.
we've got that, and then depending on if it's even good or not, but like we'll most likely cover fucking what's it called? It's the series that has Kurt Russell in it. Um, it's like it's not. I'm gonna look it up. I'll remember the name of it. But like anyone who's watching this who knows anything about like kaiju stuff will remember it. I'm just having like brain damage right now. But
You're talking about the thing that he's in with his kid?
yeah, with his kid. Uh,
I mean, that's just Godzilla, right? I mean, it's not, but it's like the legendary
is
Godzilla
yeah,
movies.
is essentially like all the legendary like monster things, like probably King
Yeah,
Kong as well will probably be in it.
yeah.
But yeah, that will be a future episode probably with
It's
a
an
group of
American
friends.
kaiju movie about generational trauma.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I was gonna say is like my overall thoughts on American kaiju, especially American Godzilla stuff, has been like I'm well, you tried.
There was
So
a lizard.
there was a lizard. He had spines. Sure, yeah, whatever. But then I'll probably watch like Godzilla -0 and be like, ah, hey, look at that. It's good.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I I'm interested because like now it seems like an instance of like um I trying to find like the best way to describe it. It's like it's like remaking the original, but like because like the people making it are like the original is like 1954 and like realism for 1954 is like hackney now. We've got to make it more realistic. We got to
Mm.
get it to like 2020's like standard of realism. And I'm just looking at it and it's like this looks like it looks like someone's like, what if we did like I don't know, Saving Private Ryan, but it has big Godzilla in it. So like I'm kind of slightly skeptical on like that end, but I'm also like, if they can do that well, that would kind of bang though.
Yeah. That's
So,
sort of my hope for it, my expectation. But yeah, we'll see.
yeah, we will see, but that is for a future episode. And anyone who watches this episode when it comes out, this will either be a nice foreshadowing or a very bad omen. We'll see. We will see on that. But thank you all for watching this episode. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you all have a wonderful Mecha and Monster Monday. Peace.
It's a kid. There's some kid in the cockpit of the Gundam, sir.